Welcome to the International Schools podcast. I'm your host, Dan Taylor.
And I'm your co-host, John Mickton. Join us every 2 weeks for conversations with international school leaders, educators, and innovators who are working and engaging in the world of international school education.
And finally, just to say a huge thanks to our valued partner, Faria Education Group. We'll jump back in later in the podcast to give you some more information about Faria Education Group.
Welcome to the International Schools podcast. I'm your co-host, John Mickton, and really nice to be back again. And so excited because Dan is with us. Hi, Dan. Welcome back.
Hi, John. We've done a couple of individual episodes, didn't we? I spoke to Ben Rouse, and then you did a few by yourself. So it's good to be back together again.
Yeah, and you were in Bahrain. How was that?
It was great. I was in Bahrain for 4 months with took my family. I've got young children. As you know, it's interesting. I could actually live there. I really enjoyed Bahrain. It's a funny place. You wouldn't think it would be a great place to live, but actually, I met a lot of people there who were nearing retirement age who were going to stay in Bahrain. You know, it's an island, in the Arabian Gulf, and it's just it's just a really livable place. Really, really great transport connections as well. You know, you're halfway between Asia and Europe, and really, I was going to Saudi Arabia quite a lot and to UAE and stuff. So it was really good to get around.
And compared to your time in Abu Dhabi, very different?
Yeah, well, we were in Dubai, not Abu Dhabi, but completely different. Like we were planning on staying in Bahrain and then going back to Dubai, actually, because I had a lot going on there. But it's so much, for me, like Dubai is such a big city. You know, it's like London, but in the Middle East. And with a lot of, the people are different in Dubai. Let's just say that, there's a very like showy kind of, way. Bahrain is like going back to the 1980s or something. It's like stepping back in time. It's just very relaxing, very people from all over. A lot of Africans, a lot of Europeans, people from every Middle Eastern country. So it was cool, and it's very liberal. They have bars and restaurants and stuff. It was.
Oh, that's unusual. Yeah. Well, it's so interesting talking about transitions because today both of our guests, Ashley and Kelley, who are here, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to kind of talk about transitions as educators. So Ashley and Kelley will introduce themselves, but they've been transitioned as international school educators from Europe to Asia. And Kelley's actually going to another Asian school. And we just thought it'd be interesting to hear from teachers that are moving around the world, going from one culture to the other, and kind of what it's like to be recruiting, etc. So say no more. I'll let Ashley and Kelley introduce yourselves. Ashley.
And now we'd like to say a few words from our valued partner and sponsor, Faria Education Group. Faria Education Group has been with you through thick and thin, helping international schools minimize headaches and easing transitions. Whether through paperless admissions with Open Apply, curriculum-first learning with ManageBack, or school-to-home management with Schools Buddy, Faria has been your partner.
What's more, Faria has been expanding with additional services, including professional development for international school educators. Mini PD is a professional learning platform by practitioners for practitioners. With a global community of learners and coaches, Mini PD makes the learning experience more personal, flexible, and equitable. Looking for a PD solution for your school or something for yourself? Sign up for individualized coaching and enjoy a 10% discount using the code ISPodcast. Head over to app.minipd.com. That's app.minipd.com to book your personal learning coach today. Mini PD, embracing the learner in every educator.
Yes, hi, I'm Ashley. I am currently in my first year at Saigon South International School as a grade 3 homeroom teacher. I moved from Luxembourg, where I taught for 5 years, and that's where I got to meet John.
Great. Welcome, Ashley. So nice to have you. Kelley.
Hi, I'm Kelley, and this is my second year at Saigon South International School in Ho Chi Minh City, and I am a middle school PE teacher and a personal development lead. And before Saigon South, I was at the International School of Brussels, where I taught middle school PE for 8 years. And in just a few weeks, I'll be starting to head to the International School of Bangkok, where I'll be the Associate Athletic Director.
Fantastic. So two really interesting journeys here. And I think one of the things maybe Kelley, you started off, you came into Saigon South pre-COVID. So maybe talk to us a bit about, you're in Europe. What kind of incited you? You've been there 8 years. Why Asia? And what were some of the things that, you thought about that other people might want to consider?
Sure. Yeah, we got recruited and made our decision pre-COVID. We moved during COVID, and we went from quarantine to quarantine. So it was a very interesting and fun transition, as you can imagine. But yeah, my fiance and I had been in Belgium for a while, and we absolutely loved it. And we knew Europe was a place that we could stay forever if we wanted to. But that wasn't why we got into international education. We want to work at different schools. We wanted to experience different cultures, be at different types of schools with different curriculum, different student populations, different things to consider. And so we decided that it was our time to go and try somewhere new. And so that the year 2020 was the year that we chose to start looking, or 2019, I guess, at the time. And we actually thought we were going to go to Africa. And so a lot of our focus was in Africa, and it was actually at the fair in Dubai, in-person fair, that we decided to just continue to scan and see what other schools were there. And we ran across Saigon South International School, and it just was a really great fit for us. And so it was really great for us at that live fair to have the opportunity to interact with other schools that we weren't expecting to, and kind of let the journey take us where it needed to be.
Kelley, could you walk us through with the recruiting process? Like, what are the names of these fairs, if you know the websites? And obviously we know, but it'd be great because a lot of people, maybe they're working in the US or the UK, they haven't gone to one of these fairs. Could you take a step back and say, how does the international school recruitment process work? Where are the fairs and what areas do they recruit for?
Of course, yeah. So the recruiting process, I think if you're thinking of going somewhere, you kind of need to start in the summertime to get your CV and everything ready, because the fairs open as early now as October.
So some of the year before, you're saying. Summer, if you want to work in summer 2024, you start looking summer 2023.
Correct, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or you start getting your things organized, I guess. And so for us, the fair we attended was the GRC fair. That one was held in Dubai. And the reason we attended that one was it was the only fair that was actually happening before our date that we needed to tell our school by. And we were really hoping to have jobs secured for the next year, prior to letting our school know we wouldn't be returning. Yep. So that was the earliest fair. There, we were also part of the Search Associates program, and we had been signed up for those fairs in case we also needed to go. So those are fairs that happen all over the world. I know they have one in London, they have them in Boston, in Bangkok, also in Dubai, that happen at slightly different times and have slightly different focuses depending on where you think you want to go in the world. And so those were the two that we mainly used. And then this time around, when we were looking for our next posting, we were using Schroll as well.
Sure. And do they have a fair as well? I'm not familiar with that.
They had virtual fairs this year.
Fairs,
I'm not sure if they normally would have an in-person fair, but I assume they might as well. They're more European based, but their outreach is further than Europe, but a lot of European schools.
Could you walk us through Dubai? What's it like? They've got something online to get in touch with the schools beforehand? And can you walk around and just meet schools? What's it like, the fair? How did it go down?
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. Well, I found them a lot of fun. They're also stressful and overwhelming, but I loved it. So most of the schools we had been in contact prior. You are on a database. You can start to communicate. Schools can see your resume. You can see the school's profile, and you can reach out, and they can reach out. And then we started to have interviews via Zoom at the time, pre-Google Meet, pre-Zoom, or via Skype, sorry. And so by the time we went to the fair, we had 7 or 8 schools that we already knew we were planning to meet with. So we had set those up ahead of time. However, the day of the fair opening, all of the schools in attendance had set up within a conference room at a hotel. And they had a board with what job opportunities were available at their school and where their school was, and had representatives from their school. So a lot of people also organize their first interviews with a school out on the spot at the fair as well. So a little bit of both could happen.
Great. Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you for that really detailed. I think it's so important for people to understand that. Now, Ashley, you were in a different context because you didn't go to a life fair because it was in the midst of COVID. So maybe talk to us a bit about, if you can't go to a life fair, what was the process like? What were some things that you had to grapple with? Kelley got to go and see people, and she was thinking kind of Africa, and she ended up in Vietnam, but she was in the fair, and that kind of fluidity occurred kind of spontaneously. But you here, you're in Europe, you're recruiting, and there's no fair. Walk us through the steps that you had to engage with.
Yeah, like Dan was saying, I got my Search Associates profile ready, started to get it ready in summer of 2020, so I could start recruiting that fall and January as well, because I knew the big London Search Associates job fair was usually in January, but it would be virtual. And I believe what they did was, instead of having the big fair in London and the big fair in Bangkok, they did 2 virtual weekends. So they extended the length of the fair, and you basically registered online, and you requested interviews and also had invitations for interviews. And what's nice is with Search Associates, they do fairs, but they also have opportunities to see current job openings all the time. So I could start looking, as soon as I had my profile, what was there and what was coming up. And then it got time to get closer to the fair, and certain schools were participating, and you knew who was going to be there, and then you got to see specific jobs that were open. And so, I wasn't necessarily shooting for Asia, but seeing in the time we were in with COVID and how there's lots of Asian schools with lots of openings, it kind of really opened my mind more to getting to a different area of the world, and how that might actually be a little bit more exciting and kind of help me grow even more. And so, things were starting to look that way, where most of my interviews were with schools in Asia. And, Saigon South just happened to have that good, you get that feeling sometimes with certain things, you have that gut feeling. And luckily it was mutual, and just took a leap and came during COVID, and it's been a whirlwind ever since.
I can only imagine.
I just on the sorry, John. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I
was going to say, Kelley, just to finish off the recruiting thing, like you mentioned that your fiance, like how did you find it? Obviously, a lot of people are teaching couples. How did you find it, both of you getting a position? Did you always try the same school, or did you just try the same city? Or did you say, if one of us got a position in one city, then the other one will try and get a position? Or did you say one of us is going to lead and the other one's going to follow? Like, what was your strategy there?
Yeah, it is a strategy. It is a bit of a game. And my fiance is a math teacher, so he loves those types of strategies. We actually, since we were going before we told our school, we knew that we had kind of, for that fair, we were going with the strategy. It has to be a good fit for both of us. And by a good fit, meaning our number one choice of what we wanted to teach, or we would continue looking at other fairs. And so we weren't, and because we were, so happy at the school we were at, we said, if we really find nothing and it doesn't happen, we were in that fortunate situation where we could stay. So for us, we only applied to schools where there were positions for both of us. However, we both can teach a range of age ranges. So he can do middle school and high school. I can do classroom, elementary school, and middle school or elementary school PE. So we applied to a variety, but our top choices that we kind of pursued were ones that were, again, the fit for both of us for what we both wanted to teach. And the year we applied for a number of schools, they just happened to have the math PE combo, which we weren't sure if that would be a thing or not a thing. I mean, I think, but otherwise we were going to lead with him for math, as that's a pretty coveted role for a lot of schools. So we were
Definitely
happy to go with that, but it worked out for us that we intentionally went in saying we wanted to keep both of us kind of having a priority, and it worked out. But I think a lot of people, like you said, have to kind of make those choices depending on what jobs they're looking for.
I mean, I think schools like John's had a lot more experience in this, but I think schools like teaching couples because there's a perception that they're more stable, they're more likely to stay and see out the contract. Is that your experience, John?
Yeah, I think that sometimes the thinking, especially if you hire a family, they tend to stay longer. They're not going to be as transient, and some schools want that consistency. So yeah, I agree. Nothing against single people, Ashley, of course. Both of you, and Ashley, maybe you can talk to this. Kelley also talked about this, is that you went in with nothing that defined as, I want to teach in this country. Why did you go with that mindset? Why did you not say, okay, these schools I'm targeting, and if they don't do it, I'm not going to go? You both were very open, and as you said, Ashley, kind of Asian schools, and suddenly you never thought of it, and there you are. What was some of your thinking behind that, and what might be some advice that you would want to give to educators considering this journey?
I think the more open you keep yourself, then the more opportunities you have. I think limiting to one country or one place, isn't always the best idea when you're looking to move and to grow and to expand your experience. I think you have to always remain open. And for me, I didn't have a particular place in mind. I just wanted to find a good fit personally and professionally for me to keep growing. And so Vietnam was not on my radar at all. But it became to be on my radar once I found this school that I gelled really well with. And so I put the priority for me as a good fit with the school. And that comes hand in hand with figuring out, okay, where am I going? What is the culture like? How am I going to, find my fit here? But what's great about any international school, I think, is that there's always that expat community. And no matter where you go, there's people literally waiting for you to get there to help you find your way and to help you get to know the community and help you feel a part of the community. So that's a comfort for me, in knowing that that will always be there no matter where you go.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying, and both Kelley alluded to this too, is that I think you should never go choose a job based on the country. You should choose it based on the school. Definitely. And one of the things is that you spend more time in the school, especially as a current administrator. My hours are so long. And you want to make sure that's a good fit. And I really like the way you echoed that, both of you, is that you were looking for the professional fit. And by coincidence, you both ended it in Vietnam, but you maybe had different directions. And I can't stress enough, I think, for people considering this journey, is you really have to spend time with the school. How does it match your own professional aspirations and your own interest in the curriculum? Kelley, you alluded, different curriculum. So I really think that's so important. What were you, now that you came to Asia, what Kelley, let's start with you. What was the first big, like, Asian school, European school? What is the first thing you were like, wow, that's different?
That's a great question. Partially, I would have to say, for me, the climate dictates a little bit, because I'm a PE teacher. And so being a PE teacher outside in Belgium versus being a PE teacher outside in Vietnam, kids are not always pumped to be outside when it's, 37 degrees and 80% humidity. But that's not something I was used to. So one of the big first things I noticed was like, oh, wow, I'm going to have to adjust my teaching style or what I'm teaching. At the time, we also had very strict COVID restrictions at school in terms of what we could teach. And so I think that was, for me, was like, oh, this is a whole different game, right? This is a whole different environment of students that I'm teaching in, and different facilities I'm teaching in, and different students who have different interests in the things I am teaching as well. And I think my first kind of week I was teaching outside, and that was kind of like the, whoa, okay, here we go. Which was a great challenge, but it also took a while to get used to and figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley, what about you?
I definitely feel I interact much more with the local Vietnamese people here than I ever did with Luxembourgish people. We have a lot more local staff here in our school than we had in Luxembourg. And so I feel very much more connected to the Vietnamese culture and understanding, more about their way of life, because I'm with them every day. And that's something that's very valuable, I think, when you move to a new country is getting to know that culture. And I've really had that opportunity to learn from them each and every day. In my classroom, I have my own teaching assistant, and she's Vietnamese, and she helps me in more ways than one than just being, in the classroom with my students. So that's a super great privilege and opportunity.
I have a question for both of you. Do you find, cause I've spent a lot of time in Asia, and we're actually probably going to spend the second half of this year. I'm going to go with my family from September to the end of the year to Asia again. It seems to me, working with a lot of Asian schools, there's a much more demanding culture in terms of parental expectations, in terms of have you noticed? Could you say anything? Obviously, every Asian country is very different. I mean, I'd say the most extreme example is probably South Korea that I've seen, in terms of every kid is working till 10 o'clock at night until they fall asleep on things. But have you found that, the work ethic and the parental expectations, is it noticeably different?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. A lot of our students go to another school after our school.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that, kind of how that came about for you, Ashley, that realization. What were some evidences? And then Kelley, maybe also in your context.
There is a big push for success in a lot of Asian cultures. And also, we have a big Korean population. And so a lot of my students will go to Korean school after school to keep up, their Korean language or culture, or, things to support their home life as well. And, just seeing them, I have one, particular student who will bring in all these math problems she wants to show me from her after school. And the approaches to learning are very different. And so it's sometimes hard to find that bridge for our students. And our approaches to learning at SSIS are a certain way, but sometimes they don't always match up with sort of the Asian way of thinking of, what is learning and how do we do this and how do we approach this. And so sometimes when you see work coming in from students, you're like, where did that come from? And you kind of have to talk it through and say, okay, well, let's bring it back to our conversations in class and how can we connect it from there? If that makes sense. Kelley, I'll let you kind of add on.
Yeah, no, I think you said that really well, Ashley. I think I agree with how you put that. I think in the middle school context as well, I think families start to see that as kind of that transition to high school, and then high school's full on time. I was actually just talking to a parent who lives in my apartment complex. We were both walking our dogs, and I asked what they were doing for the summer. And her daughter's in 7th grade going into 8th grade. And she said, oh, we'll take a 10-day vacation, but then my daughter has to spend the rest of the summer getting ready for 8th grade. And
wow,
my idea of getting ready for 8th grade is go play, go swimming, go to the beach, go unwind. But a lot, especially at our school, a lot of our students are first generation international school students. A lot of their families, don't necessarily even speak fluent English. They're working really hard in our host country to be able to send their children to our school, to be able to open up new pathways for their future. And so the students and their families, I think there's a lot of pressure that, the pathway for that they see for their future is often going out of Vietnam for university. And so to be able to do that, there's a lot of pressure to get those scores up to do really well in academics. So as a PE teacher, I also get to see, we talk about social, emotional, mental health as well. And so often talking to students who are really tired and asking why, and learning about how late they're staying up, and looking at that from a balanced perspective is something we have conversations about. But and that PE is not necessarily the high stakes subject that they're really keen on their kids getting that straight A. And so it's been an interesting perspective for me as well. And I think our students really want to do their families proud, and their families really just want what's best for them. But they often see getting there by attending school after our school to ensure that they're continuing to build their academic success.
So do you think, compared to when you were in Europe, were there pressures? Was it different type of pressure from the parents? And now there's this new pressure, which I'm hearing is more academic focused. If you're a Korean, you want to maybe stay in parallel, know the Korean curriculum just in case you go back to a Korean school or whatever. What were some of the differences of the pressures that you had to navigate as an educator, Ashley?
I think a lot of it, I think a lot of it you feel from the students because they feel from their parents. And me personally, this year, I haven't had a lot of intense interactions with parents. And I think it's because it's the language barrier. And so you have that to consider as well. You know, when I was in Europe, we could pretty much communicate with all the parents fairly well. And now, you know, it definitely takes, you know, the help of my TA or somebody to, you know, be at those parent teacher conferences or translate the emails. And so it really comes down to that bridge of the student, and they're communicating a lot. Like Kelley was saying, they're tired. You know, I had a student say he didn't have a great weekend because he had to go to his school on Saturday. And so you really feel it from the kids first and foremost. And so you just kind of have to take that when you are, you know, just thinking about them as the whole child as you do. And you're, you know, trying to create the best learning opportunities for them. And consider that, you know, is definitely a different approach than when I was in Luxembourg, for sure.
And Kelley, when you were in Belgium, your interactions were different with parents. Did you feel you had different pressures?
Well, I also think one of the things here for at least my 2 years here in Vietnam is we've had really limited parent interactions due to COVID. And so even, you know, in terms of what our parent teacher conferences have looked like virtual versus in person, even just the casual conversations you have with parents as you interact with them when they're on campus. So it just feels different, right? Because you don't necessarily feel like you've established the same relationship that maybe you have so I think there's just a piece of it that just your relationships with parents feel different than they have when I was in Belgium, especially after being somewhere for 8 years. It definitely feels different. For me, from the PE perspective, I don't necessarily feel I have a lot more pressure from the parents. I think for me, from the students, and it's a middle school wide and high school wide, you know, as soon as you assign something and as soon as you grade it, if the grade is not the grade they want, you will get an email within 30 seconds of you publishing the grade. And so there's more of the intensity, but it actually comes from the students, not from the parents. So I think it's the students care much more about what those numbers are showing up because their parents also can see it. But the communication is primarily coming from the students. So it is interesting because the students will say the pressure, you know, it's more of a family pressure, but when they're communicating with me in middle school, which I know is different than the way they might be able to communicate in elementary school, it's coming from them as well. So it's an interesting interplay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you made a good point, Kelley. With COVID, I haven't had any formal face-to-face communication with any of my parents this year. So that's very different feel. Of course, we've had a couple Zoom conversations, and I see them from a distance when I walk my kids to the turnstiles every day. But, you know, we have this system where parents are still not allowed on campus. And so I might see them from a distance, or, you know, maybe not have even seen them at all yet, which is a very different feeling too.
I'm curious about, good transition, talk about, you know, transition and moving in, like in the COVID times. How, can you talk through like first of all, what it was like with the quarantine? What is the quarantine process in Vietnam when you did it? What did you have to do? And then how's it been afterwards? Have you been able to go out to socialize and do regular things, or how restrictive is it? I'm curious to hear how it is on the ground there.
Well, funny enough, Kelley and I met in quarantine. We were right across the hall from each other at the hotel. So we would get the knock on the door that our meals were delivered outside, and we'd open the door and we'd wave at each other, and you know, and then we would Zoom later. So she was really like, you know, my first friend here, straight from the airport to the hotel, and we got connected in the hotel. And it was a rough go for a little bit. I got out of the hotel, and it was
2 weeks. Talk us through the hotel. Was it 2 weeks? Could you leave? Did you have a balcony? Was it like, did you choose the hotel? Like, how does it work?
Oh gosh. So I arrived at the airport, and I had to put on a full hazmat suit, and they had a whole big bus just for me. And I got to the hotel. They had a big spraying machine of sanitizer. They literally hosed me and my luggage down. I had to stand 6 feet away from the person that was checking me in. And then they put my bags on a trolley and said, okay, here's your card, up you go, whatever floor. And I got to my room, shut the door, and it was supposed to be for 3 weeks when we started. But while I think 5 days into it or so, Vietnam went back down to 2 weeks. And so we didn't have a balcony at that hotel. We could crack our window. We got a knock on the door 3 times a day for our meals.
You couldn't go out. You didn't have like an hour to go to the pool or anything, nothing like, because like in Thailand, they had a system where you could go out for certain times in a day and everything,
Yeah. And Kelley, when you arrived, you've done a lot of quarantines by now, but when you arrived the summer before, you had a little bit, you were at a different place, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I arrived, we actually had to put our hazmat suits on in Korea and fly from Korea to Ho Chi Minh City with hazmat suits, leather, latex gloves, and goggles on. And then when we arrived in Ho Chi Minh City, we were put on some members of our school actually stayed at the hotel that Ashley and I stayed at this summer. My fiance, myself, and someone else were put at a different location. And it was about 2 hours away from Ho Chi Minh City. And they had a bus waiting for all of us on going there. And all the bus said was COVID-19. And then they put all of us, like 50 passengers, all just still in our full hazmat suits. And I tell you, because at that time there was no COVID in Vietnam when we arrived. So we were like, the people to be feared. And the number of people who were stopping and taking pictures of our bus, that probably looked terrifying because there's 57 people in hazmat suits and all it says is COVID-19 on it, driving through the streets of Ho Chi Minh. So we made our way out to this little small village area. And yeah, our hotel did have a balcony that after a certain number of days, we were able to go out on the balcony for a little bit of time. We may or may not have really been allowed to do it, but the hotel let us all do it. And so we would get some fresh air. But other than that, same as with, what Ashley and I did this summer was 3 meals a day. At that point, we were getting COVID tested every 3 days. So it was also a 2-week quarantine, and every 3 days we'd get taken to get a COVID test. And then they always you can't get released until they have the result from your first COVID test. So it's at an extra day. So you think it's a 2-week quarantine, but it's really 15 days or 16 days. My first one was 16. And then that one, the day I got out, the next day I started with my students. So that was my intro to Ho Chi Minh City.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that's something which is incredible, is that so many educators transition from country to country with these different COVID restrictions and everything. And so, Ashley, you very likely did not meet your kids for a while, because after the hotel, what happened? So you guys are in the hotel, you have your 3 weeks, as Kelley said, because of the testing. And then what was the next phase? Where did you go from there?
The next phase was a temporary service department, because there were so many restrictions. You couldn't travel around and go apartment shopping. So, they set up these longer stints at a temporary service department so that, you had a longer amount of time to choose where you were going to live. And I was there from July to October, because October was when I was allowed out and about, apart from going to the grocery store. So yeah, I remember getting pictures of my apartment I'm sitting in now from a realtor, and we still weren't allowed to call a car or a taxi or really get out and about. So I got a friend to walk over with me, we're just going to go to the grocery store, but we're going to look at this apartment. And it worked out. I made it out of my service department and got to my own apartment. But there was, it definitely, after arriving, it got worse before it got better. we got so far as to having a stay-at-home order where grocery stores were closed. We weren't allowed outside, and that was hard. Obviously, thank goodness our school really considered, the new teachers, especially. We didn't know our way around. We didn't know how to get water and food, and but we figured it out, and along the way, we, started school, and, new teacher training actually started in the hotel room for me, all the Zoom meetings. And our first day of school was obviously virtual, and we went until February. And that's when I saw my kids face to face.
So how did you get to know anyone in that time? Were bars and restaurants open? Was there anything open, or was it all closed?
No, I think grocery stores opened back up, a few weeks in maybe September, Kelley, and then October was a few restaurants. Kelley, do you remember when we went to Saigon Craft and they said, you guys are family? So we were
they weren't allowed to have customers yet.
So Ashley, like, you going by yourself, like, how were you just getting to know people, your colleagues and stuff on Zoom? Were you just, because I guess you couldn't socialize for quite a few months then, that's all.
Oh yeah, that's right. And I also met another couple at school. They were living just a street over, and I would sneak out and go over to their house and use their oven to bake, because that's one of my hobbies. And we would also, meet in the street and exchange. Like, I had a lot of vegetables, and she had a lot of lettuce, and we would do these like war rationing trades out in the street, after dark. Just to, but we're also in this sort of bubble community of Ho Chi Minh City. We're in this district neighborhood that is sort of a bubble. We're Kelley, like we're in a good community. We're very safe, and people weren't really concerned about COVID so much in our particular neighborhood as they were more downtown, where people are living on top of each other.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. I'm curious, John, for you, like, because like now we've kind of come out of the other side of it in Europe, and I mean, honestly, for the last month in Bahrain and then in Prague, the only time I've ever seen anyone wear masks was on the airplane, and even then, like, we kind of had it over our chin just to make the effort of showing. Like in Prague now, I can tell you honestly, I have not seen anything different than pre-COVID in 10 days. Like nothing, not a single person's wearing a mask. Nothing is different. And honestly, I've almost COVID was this huge drama, and now it's like I've almost forgotten about it. It was almost like, oh, it used to be COVID. Yeah. Do you find the same in Luxembourg?
Absolutely. I was on a plane, and I got on the plane with a mask, and everybody looked at me like, why are you wearing a mask? And I was like, well, I thought you had to have masks on planes. And the lady was like, no, you don't need a mask. And I went back to Switzerland, and it was like COVID had never happened. It's interesting because I think, we forget that there are other areas of the world where Kelley and Ashley are. There's still some restrictions and things, and we forget that. There's still this kind of, shared experience, but not in sync at different times. And it's just, I mean, it's amazing to think that you move to a new country and you end up not seeing your kids as an educator till February. I'm just curious, Kelley, you're a physical ed and health teacher. So when you're online, that must have been a really interesting switch. How do you engage? I know how challenging it is as a classroom teacher. I had the privilege of watching Ashley work here at Luxembourg during COVID and during the hybrid learning, and the work and time were phenomenal. Just curious, as a PE teacher, you're so dependent on equipment and maybe being outside. What happens when you're suddenly in this hotel room and you have to teach middle school kids?
Yeah, you get a really unique opportunity to rethink everything you do, which is really there's many moments where I wish COVID never happened, and I would, wish we could undo it all. And then there's many moments like this where I'm like, wow, I've grown and learned so much because of this that I wouldn't have had to, or wouldn't have been forced out of my comfort zone and challenged to rethink things if it hadn't happened. So yeah, we kind of went to the drawing board and we're like, what do we do? And we couldn't, since people couldn't leave their homes, we couldn't even, ask people to get certain equipment like a tennis ball or a jump rope. We really kind of reshifted to personal fitness focus, which we said, that's really, everyone needs that. We know everyone from COVID has kind of been really sedentary. And then we just thought of how many creative ways can we try to get kids excited about moving their bodies on Zoom with other people. And so we did things like a virtual Olympics. We did, we worked with an organization called Sworkit that has launched kind of a youth platform. We've created a ton of units from scratch. Like we all kind of got together. And one of the things I've loved is the PE community, and just like on Twitter, on Facebook, out, through personal networks, has been fantastic about sharing what people are doing and what they've done that's worked well. But even now we still have to offer virtual PE lessons. And so all year long, we've been creating new lessons with new learning objectives and goals for our students. And it's really been a great professional challenge, and learning different tools like tech tools. I learned Screencastify. I was editing videos for Olympics and trying to make things more exciting for kids. And so it was a challenge. And I would say if you ask the students, it probably wasn't always as exciting as being in person. But they did tell me they liked a few things from it. So there's a few things we have kept. But yeah, it was very difficult. And I think by around Christmas and December time, we were starting to lose our creativity and thinking, what can we do next to keep this different and exciting? But it was also fun at times because it was really challenging professionally.
Absolutely. And, one thing you talked about, which I think Dan definitely can connect to, is this idea of how the community rallied together, educators around the world. And I know Dan was giving out a lot of free PD. You basically said for weeks and months, they were giving free PD. I know that myself, I relied on that, and I'm sure Ashley too, the professional learning community. And I think that's something, if anything, is the silver lining, is how generous people were to support each other, especially educators from Asia, from Europe, from Africa, from South America, wherever in the world. That was something that I really tip my hat off, because I feel organizations, and even Dan, that is an organization that, of course, makes its income from running conferences and providing PD. That generosity from companies like Apps Events, I think, were really quite exemplary. And then you realize how rich of a professional learning network you have. And sometimes when you're live and in your building or in your bubble, you forget that. And I think, to me, that really amplified it. I don't know, Dan, if you have some thoughts too about that.
No, I mean, for me, it was just what else you do. You got to do something, like all our live training has just disappeared overnight. So it's like, well, got to do something to keep busy, So we just did loads of online stuff, But it's great. I mean, it's funny if you take Apps Events as an organization, like we're very different post-COVID to pre-COVID. Like pre-COVID, we were just focused on professional learning, Google training, summits, boot camps, custom training. Now we're doing all kinds of technical stuff. We're doing remote support. We're doing a lot of stuff with IT admins, much more kind of day-to-day technical stuff. We're doing a lot more consulting for Google directly. Like half our work is just with Google. So like we have a complete different organization post-COVID, because all our business went to zero, all the summits, all the boot camps, all the custom training with, leadership and stuff. And now it's coming back, but it was good. It was a stressful time, but in the end, it was great. I think it's hard for people that run businesses when these dramas happen. I think everyone forgets that. It's when you don't have a fixed income, it is tough. But actually, it's been fine, really. But you just got to get on with it, haven't you? There's nothing you can't complain about it. If you choose the life of an entrepreneur, you have to put up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, Ashley and Kelley, that since your experience with COVID and having worked in a non-COVID environment as educators in Europe and now in Asia, has it changed you as an educator? Are you looking at this journey very differently through a different lens because of your experience? Maybe start with Ashley and over to Kelley.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, how can it not change you? I think about just, approaching how we go about our day-to-day routines with each other. And I think back to, being completely virtual with my students for so long, and then making that huge transition to starting physical school together. And we kept saying, oh, we're going back to school. But for me, I was like, I'm not really going back to school. I'm just starting school here for the first time with you guys. And it was, it definitely puts a different perspective on how you handle your relationships with students. I mean, in some ways, being virtual, I felt like in some aspects, I knew my students better because of our interactions and how different they were. I saw their work every day way more than I maybe saw in the classroom, because the only way I could see it was by, going into Seesaw and clicking on it, rather than, just kind of overlooking what they're doing as they're doing it in the classroom. And so interacting with students and thinking about how you're giving feedback is something that I've really reflected on, especially in a virtual setting, and how that feedback and timely feedback is so important, whether you're virtual or physical, but making that a routine for you and your students as you live out your day to day, and just how you interact with each other is definitely kind of where it's put my focus on a lot.
Wow, that's so cool, especially this idea of feedback and really elevating the importance of that, because we often talk about it, but it sounds like, and you've just shared through your experience, it just really came in the forefront. Kelley, how about yourself, your own experience?
Yeah, it also has definitely changed me. And actually, I'm going to echo similar to what Ashley said, because for me in PE, so much of my instruction, my feedback, my interactions with my students is direct, right? It's in the moment. It's when we're together. And, I'm not often assigning PE homework or things, that they're submitting for me. But one of the really great things that being virtual helped with was looking at what platforms we can use and how we can find really meaningful ways to give students feedback, even when we're in person. Because, taking a video of how a student is throwing a ball, but giving them access to that video and providing feedback or interaction with them online, is now something that can be done that wouldn't necessarily have been on my radar pre-COVID. We're thinking about, okay, what are ways, or we do a lot with students doing personal social responsibility reflections, that we do online now, and that they can keep as, versus paper, that they now have kind of a portfolio of for them to carry with them through their middle school years, that they can really look back and see how they've grown as a learner throughout the year and multiple years. So I think for me too, that feedback piece has been really important, and just rethinking the way that we also use technology in PE, and use it, but also not just use it for an immediate piece of feedback, but also how can we capture it and how can we make it available both to student and to us. Like our parents were able to see more of their students learning in PE than ever before, because they often were taking pictures or videos, which was a really fascinating thing. And it's a great thing I want to do, or if I was staying in the classroom, would want to keep doing moving forward. So I think for me, a big piece was also that, and also the collaboration that had to happen within my team was brought to a whole different level, which I thought also is something that I loved, because we really had to troubleshoot and be vulnerable and work together. And that's something that I think having a shared experience like that really helped change me and the way I, work with a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating to hear how even in the adversity, as you explained your own journeys being in that hotel room 3 knocks a day, that, now as educators, you have engaged with the new dispositions and new ways of moving forward, especially with this feedback topic that you highlighted. I think that's just so fantastic. I'm mindful of time, and I know what would be really nice is, I am sure there are many people listening here that are saying, oh, I would like to go to an international school now, or I would like to recruit. And before we wrap up, it would just be nice to hear any little nuggets, a little advice, a little like tweet. If it was a tweet, what would you want to say in a very short kind of sentence or two? Kelley, do you want to start?
Sure. I'd say go for it, right? You regret the things that you don't do, right? You don't regret continuing to do what you are doing. So if you're saying you have an interest in it, why not explore it? And to along with that, explore the things we talked about of what are your priorities? What are you looking for in your professional environment? And be really clear on what are your non-negotiables and what are the things that you're willing to kind of go either way on, and have those in your mind as you go into the recruiting process.
Thank you. Ashley.
Yeah, my gut reaction was the same. Just do it. If you're even halfway considering it, just do it. ask a lot of questions along the way as you're making your decision. But my good friend, Dania, always asked me, or told me, you can do anything for 2 years of your life. Usually these contracts are for 2 years. Just do it. You can always make a change later if you change your mind. Why not? If you're even thinking about it, it's such a great opportunity. We as educators have so many opportunities at our fingertips, and it's incredible. And so you have to take advantage of that.
Fascinating. Yeah, guys, a follow-up question. First of all, I really have either of you guys checked out a website called internationalschoolreviews.com? It's really interesting. Yes. I told John about it. It's like $30 to join, and no one has anything good to say about anything in there. It's all negative. But what's really interesting, is like there's a whole debate about what are the tier 1 schools. It's interesting how international schools have these tiers which are not officially defined anywhere, but everyone agrees there is a tiering system. Traditionally, what you would say is a tier 1 school is a traditional non-profit, well-funded international school, very much like where you guys, I would say all the schools you worked with and the ones you're going to are in. I remember one of the first times I met John very grandly told me that he would never wanted to work for a for-profit school. He only wanted to work for a traditional international school. Are you two, because obviously you've gone from and to them, is that a conscious decision you made? Like, did you look at the list of tier 1 schools on International School Reviews and say, right, I want to focus on this type of school? Or was it just, were you looking at all the schools?
I have, just by talking with other people in the teaching community, most people say, choose a non-for-profit school. Yeah. That's just kind of what most people recommend. And I know that there's opportunity, I know you don't want to limit yourself, but that's why it's important to know, like Kelley was saying, like, what are your non-negotiables and what is important to you when you're working for a school. But I haven't ever used that website, but I think, the international teaching community is actually much smaller than you realize. And the further away you go and further you move, the smaller the world gets. Yeah. And so once you start making connections with other people, you can always, if you're wondering about a school, have a question about a school, you can always find somebody who has a connection to that school. Yeah. And so you can always find your way around.
Interesting.
Kelley?
Yeah, I would agree. I think for us, we knew we wanted to be at a nonprofit school as well. So that was one of our non-negotiables, just for aligning with some of our philosophies about our education and what we wanted to do. With regards to the tier of the school, we were actually, I think, really open. One of the things that we both wanted was growth in our, profession and growth in leadership. And so we knew that might mean going to a different school with different needs or different opportunities for us. And I think also realizing that at any school, whether it's, a tier 1 school or a perceived different tier of a school, you can still grow and find those opportunities for the growth you need to get to a school where you want to go if you end up having a school in mind or an area in mind. Because I think there's always options out there, things out there. So you might end up at that tier 1 school, but not be able to make that vertical growth that you might be looking for, and not have as many opportunities versus a smaller school or maybe less established school. You might have a lot more and you might grow more in that 2-year chunk than someone else at a different school. So I think we were open. It has, we end up both at tier 1 schools or perceived tier 1 schools at both places we've worked, and we've, found many advantages to it. But I think it shouldn't necessarily be a limiting factor for someone if they're open to just looking for somewhere where they could grow.
Sure.
Yeah, especially if you're just starting out as an international teacher, that you can always grow and build from where you begin. And so, just getting yourself out there, I think, is the most important thing.
It's true. Absolutely. It's interesting because the whole profit against non-profit, my opinion now, having been to probably hundreds of schools, is that, like, if you have a great leadership team and great people to work for, it doesn't really matter what the school is. You can have a miserable time at a tier 1 school and an amazing time at a for-profit school if you've got good management and leadership there.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. Dan, is it's about the teachers and the leadership team, and what kind of culture of learning is created. And if they're for profit, they're for profit. But you're right. I would only echo with you that I think being in the IT business, usually for profit schools, there's much more curation of budgets, maybe, and that might be my own naive perception. But I definitely like the way you said that, Kelley, is that it's about, where do you want to grow? And as Ashley said, get to know the school. Maybe the school you never heard of is an amazing school because nobody in your network knew about it. And they're incredible schools that are not tier 1 schools doing amazing things. And so I think that's really important to do your homework, as you both guided us through this. I just want to thank both Ashley and Kelley for your time and just the wonderful, rich narrative that you shared with us. Unbelievable, moving through COVID, being locked in a room and everything. It's just the resilience that you both just exude is really amazing, and really hats off to both of you and to all your colleagues and everybody that's still in this situation, juggling between COVID and non-COVID and the challenges that come with that as an educator. So we so appreciate you taking the time. I know it's late in Saigon. We're just about to go for evening drinks, Dan and I, but anyway, thank you so much for your time. And I just want to remind the audience that we have show notes. Kelley and Ashley added their bios and some links, and you can follow them on Twitter. Definitely follow them. They're very active professionally in their areas of focus, so you might want to be following them and learning from them too. Dan, we get to see each other very soon.
Yeah, we do. Looking forward to
it. Very much so. And thank you both. I don't know if you have any parting words, but thank you again.
Yeah, thank you both very much. And Kelley and I have gotten to be good friends, and we are, even though she's moving on, we've made this friendship that's going to last a long time. And so that's another piece to take away from this international setting, which is awesome.
For sure. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for having these great conversations too with educators around the world. I think it's fantastic to open people's worlds up and hear from people in different areas. So thanks for inviting us.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Be well, everybody. Thanks again.